إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا، من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد, a video blog was recently published where the host, the Deobandi Takfiri preacher Daniel Haqiqatju, invited Hamza Zorzis and Muhammad Hijab for a 3-hour-long discussion under the title The Necessity of Debate. Okay, a brother of ours sent me the link and urged me to listen to it and comment. Now obviously there's no way that I could sit through 3 long hours of such a discussion, and I honestly don't think that many people could anyway. So I decided to just comment on the main topic as they presented it, in the conclusion at the end if there's any, and if while skimming through it I caught something that called for a particular comment, I would point at it, and that would be all that I could afford to do with such a mammoth of a discussion. The vlog starts with Daniel introducing the guests, calling them legendary debaters, okay, which alone of course tells you a lot about Daniel's inclination and active involvement with the current Kalami trend fostered by Hizbi preachers in the West. Other brothers, Salafi preachers, have done a considerable effort in warring against that trend, Jazahumullah khaira, yet they need all the support we can provide, since it is obvious to everyone how appealing this trend is to lay Muslims in the West and worldwide, given the Western culture of debate, which, as I've shown in this series and elsewhere, is part of the Greek heritage of scholasticism in the West. Okay, the founding tradition underneath the entire Western Academy. Such heritage that I've shown to be foundational in the Western Academy. Many brothers have indeed shown how this trend is effectively leading people, especially the younger ones, into embracing old Kalami beliefs in a context that is presented to the youth as purely Salafi, endorsed even by no less than Ibn Taymiyyah himself, rahimahullah. Yet many people continue to be attracted to the false pretense of rationality and reason underlying that sophist tradition, that sophist method, thinking, just like the mutakallimin of old used to think and claim, that in this day and age, this is the way to invite people of that culture to accept Islam and to reject atheism. If we all agree that to call unto someone to accept Islam, we need to appeal to their reason, their common sense, and in its sense of fairness, then they would argue we need to appeal to what they would view as reason and science. However, not all that they, the kuffar, would consider a reasonable question is indeed reasonable or a rationally plausible inquiry in the first place. Okay, and of course, not all that they would consider a proper way of establishing knowledge about a given topic or answer to a given question is necessarily proper or rationally plausible. Alright, the Greek tradition underlying both major Western traditions of philosophy, the analytic and the continental, is fundamentally flawed in terms of how it defines reason and rationality on certain issues, how it construes proper knowledge and the ways to achieve it about the unseen, and how it fosters debate and debatability in matters of faith and belief. The problem with the Kalami tradition, brothers and sisters, in both its Western versions, it's in both its Western version, the apologetic theology, and its Islamic one, the Ilm al-Kalam, is basically that it swallowed those fundamental flaws wholesale and thereby proceeded to produce knowledge on issues of existence, al-wujud, the divine, al-ilahiyat, prophethood, al-nubuwat, and the validity of the deen, sidq al-nubuwah, in precisely the manner we are supposed to reject. Okay? Just because the audience of da'wah in the West have been brought up in a culture that glorifies philosophical debates as the epitome of rational deliberation and argumentation, and the proper way to call unto someone to embrace any given belief system, doesn't mean that we have to abide by their ways in doing da'wah. Okay, we don't. We Muslims did not inherit a philosophical tradition for a religion. We did not arrive at the tenets of our faith from some process of armchair argumentation or debate. We do not follow a philosopher who arrived at the tenets of our belief system after some laborious process of contemplation and debate with fellow philosophers. No. If that were indeed the case, then they would have every right to insist that we call them to our religion in that manner, to provide those supposed ancient propositional arguments of ours, to debate on them, to defend their premises against all conceivable objections, and to proceed to build our entire belief system on those grounds. That, however, is not what our religion is, or what it is founded upon. Okay, Islam is the only belief system that positively appeals to fitrah, to the innate reason and common sense of every sensible, right-minded, unbiased human being. It doesn't require theory or theorization of any shape, way, or form to be able to see it for the ultimate truth that it is. Indeed, it only required the rebuttal of all opposing theory and philosophy from the very roots and foundations of such philosophies, uprooting all opposing fallacies with power and precision in the way that followers of the Sahaba and the Salaf do, should automatically leave the kafir groundless in their vain attempt to dismiss Islam. And if they would still insist afterwards that Islam is false, or that they are unconvinced that it is the truth, then we are obliged to deem the arguments served and to judge them as liars. There is a point in Islam where not only does the oral da'wah to someone who insists they do not see Islam as the truth has to conclude, but that someone has to be judged as a liar. But that someone has to be judged as a liar. Okay? A liar to themselves and to others. This would never be the case if indeed the rational case for Islam were grounded upon one or more propositional arguments that have to pass the test of philosophical scrutiny for the deen's validity to be established, as the Kalami method is committed to. If that were the case, then not only would it not make sense for us to end any debate with the conclusion that the opponent is lying when they claim they do not see the validity of our position, it would be utterly unfair to judge anyone at all for choosing to reject Islam, or any particular part of it. Anyone at all. Because after all, a theoretical proposition is merely that, a proposition. If anyone claims they do not see the validity of the proposed case, no matter how sophisticated, well argued, and well versed the arguer for it happens to be, then nobody should have the authority to blame them. Okay, and I repeat, nobody. And if one day after accepting Islam someone decided to revert, then no one should be allowed to judge them. Okay, it's all a matter of opinion after all, and people do change their minds, obviously. But that's precisely the problem here, brothers and sisters. The problem is fundamentally methodological. Okay, it's not that we have issues with a certain belief system that emerged from the method of Kalam in this sect or that. We have issues with the method itself. The method that those preachers are so happy to uphold and to champion as the most effective way to do da'wah. Alright? There is no burden of demonstrative proof upon us as Muslims at all in the way that we do da'wah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're not here to propose Him as a theory that builds upon some proclaimed first principles in metaphysics. We are here to blast away the foundations of falsity that keeps people from accepting His messenger, to let the light of truth shine through as it should for those who might be willing to accept it. This would include, of course, proving that atheism is fundamentally irrational, embarrassingly so, scandalously so, and we do so most effectively if we start from defeating the entire Greek tradition of metaphysical theory the way it should be defeated, not by proposing the foundations of our belief system, employing an argument that is itself yet another application of that very tradition, the Greek tradition. We debunk the foundations of falsity, not propose the rationality of our own faith based on the very standards of reason that falsity itself is founded on. We blast the foundations of atheism, not propose some philosophical argument for the validity of what modern day mutakallimun have come to label so loosely theism. Okay, that Greek practice of sophistry is what those guys would call debate and would argue, as they're doing in this vlog, not only that it is favorable or more effective than other methods, but that it is actually necessary, the necessity of debate. Wallahu musta'an wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. So when someone challenges us to prove that the creator we believe in exists, our response should not be to accept the challenge as the Kalami method would commit us to. The proper response would be to show the absurdity of everything they would take for a reason not to admit His existence, subhanahu wa ta'ala. The distinction between these two methods, brothers and sisters, is of utmost importance, given how keen those preachers of philosophical da'wah are on showing that unless you follow their ways, the way of Greek propositional argumentation in public debates, you would never be able to prove the rationality of your own faith. And again, we are not in a position of validation. Again, we are not in a position of validation. We are not in a position where we have to do apology for embracing our faith the way we do. The very notion of apologetics stems from the idea that a philosopher, by definition, should never embrace any belief system as a final, indisputable truth, as some ultimate fact that cannot be proven false. Okay, the Greek tradition teaches, in fact, that all knowledge claims are equal in their debatability and their refutability in principle. We need to understand the evidentialist epistemology upon which the entire tradition was founded. No deductive or inductive proposition that any philosopher upholds for any belief they embrace at any point in time should be treated as final or unshakable or irrefutable, much less should they be justified in blaming anybody for choosing to reject it. Okay? The proper position should rather be that he or she, the philosopher, accepts the position or that belief on the grounds that thus far the preponderance of arguments they have been exposed to for the belief and against it, leave them convinced that it is true. That's it. That's all they can afford to say. But only insofar as this is the case would they be justified in embracing it. They must thus add some condition to their belief. Okay? It's a conditional belief. They only think it's true because thus far nobody has been able to show them that it is false. And thus they must declare that they're willing to reject it once it happens that someone manages to do so, to show that it's false in a manner that convinces them, okay, to propose a theory that convinces them more than their own. Okay? So to embrace a belief, any belief, to the extent of ultimate acceptance and unwavering certainty, final certainty, in the manner that religious traditions require, would be to choose to blind your mind and deafen your ears to the omnipresent possibility of getting your faith refuted and debunked by some clever philosopher here or there, no matter what that faith may be, according to the Greek tradition. No self-respecting intellectual should do that in that tradition. Never terminate the ongoing debate, any debate, or claim that anybody can, in fact, or at least potentially, debunk your position, whatever the subject matter of that position may be, okay, in a manner that you never even thought was possible. That would be cardinally wrong. Cardinally. Every belief must be held at any degree of certainty only on the condition that you have not yet come across any good reason to reject it. No such conditional belief is acceptable in the foundational tenets of any religious tradition that teaches prophecy and inherits a certain bulk of text that is ascribed to the Creator as His Word. Thus it follows that the believer in any inherited belief system or religious tradition as such is required to apologize for such an intolerably strong position of acceptance and belief and confidence in what they believe. A burden of proof would thus be placed onto his or her shoulders to show that the very notion of submitting oneself to their basic tenets unconditionally for as long as they live is justifiable. Okay? They are required by the Academy to argue in favor of some reason they have for dismissing the mere possibility of their beliefs ever getting refuted at any point in the future. If they insist on teaching them to their folk as such, why would they presume that their faith has any special epistemic warrant that renders it irrefutable as opposed to other philosophical doctrines? An irrefutable belief? No such belief exists according to that tradition. It may take a very clever philosopher to successfully debunk the most commonly accepted claims about reality, of course, and you may only be allowed to think that it's quite unlikely that it could happen to you, to your own beliefs one day. But if you insist that it cannot be done at all in principle as a matter of rational impossibility for any particular belief that you hold, then unless you show that to be the case in a manner that they would accept from you by means of some demonstrable argument, then you're not rational in what you believe. Yeah, then you're only following others blindly. Okay, and woe unto thee if you fail to set yourself apart from the blind followers. That would amount to a charge of blasphemy in the eyes of the Academy. Thus, a believer in any inherited religion would, by necessity of the tradition thus described, find themselves compelled to take one of two routes. either response on epistemic justification, propose an epistemic justification for their faith based on the metaphysical system that happens to be the received paradigm in the academy at the time, in which case it would only be reduced to a deductive consequence of that theory, and thus suffer the same fate of that theory itself, should it rise or should it fall. Or come up with some argument in epistemology to prove that there is indeed such thing as basic beliefs, and that such beliefs do not require any premises or first principles upon which to build them, and that your beliefs, your particular beliefs are of this sort, and thus you would be justified in embracing them without having to prove them in particular, in any way, yeah. In which case, they would suffer from obvious circularity, since the same Bayesian conditionality that would inflict belief B, and they would be forced to permit, would then be displaced to the theoretical reasons why B, or anything like it themselves or itself, should be considered a basic belief that is beyond refutation in the first place. Okay, and that's what Alvin Plantinga and Walter Stroff attempted to do in their Reformed epistemology following the Calvinist tradition, to provide lengthy arguments for why belief in God is warranted without need for argumentation. They failed to realize, however, that inadvertently their efforts, by their very nature, left it a highly debatable issue, propositional issue, as to whether or not one can be warranted in such a belief without bothering with argumentation or proof. So no matter what you do as a believer in an inherited religion, if you commit yourself to the Greek tradition, you would have to submit yourself to some golden cage where you find yourself unallowed to express finality and irrefutability in anything that you say, and to always at all times be willing to dismiss your own beliefs and reject your entire faith as demonstrably invalid. Okay? It has been demonstrated that it's false, and so you have to reject it. As such, you would have to commit yourself to a miserable epistemic stance, where you would have to declare, when in company of fellow religious people, that you hold your beliefs dear and as ultimately final and unconditionally valid, not hinged on condition of others failing to refute it, that is, as ones you are willing to fight and die for if you have to, whereas at the same time, to present yourself as a free philosopher, a free thinker who is always willing to reject your entire belief system if someone managed to show it to be false when you're in the company of academic philosophers. Okay? It's a two-faced business. And as long as you present your reasons for accepting the faith as ones of the kind I just highlighted, of the kind the academy would potentially allow you to champion, you are actually never more than a proposer of some major theory, either metaphysical or epistemic, or both, in which case you should always be willing to let go of it, all of it, okay, at any point in the future, on pain of methodological contradiction. No such thing as deciding to only die as a Muslim, or to remain a Christian or a Jew for as long as you live, no matter what, under that tradition. There's no such thing. It's not acceptable at all, in principle. That's what you would be forced to apologize for in a manner that would only put you in the miserable epistemic and methodological contradiction I just described. Okay, that's why it has to be, that's why it's called an apology. You're apologizing for choosing to accept something for as long as you live, as an ultimate truth. That, brothers and sisters, in a nutshell, is what's fundamentally wrong with the epistemology of Kalam, and of any other form of apologetic theology that commits itself to the Western tradition of debate. And it is, among other reasons, why the Salaf rejected the Kalam method in its entirety, in its very principle, to the extent of stating that even if a mutakallim ended up with a belief that matches the beliefs of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they would still be dubbed as innovators nonetheless. Why? Because of the way they ended up accepting and embracing that belief itself, obviously. Because of the method itself. Alright? And that's what those preachers of philosophical da'wah are failing to comprehend. After that legendary debater introduction, Daniel then proceeds to open the discussion about a recent public debate that these two debaters held in the University of Johannesburg in South Africa with some atheist academics. He, of course, admits that it has indeed stirred controversy among Muslim preachers in the West. So he starts by asking them about what incites them to do what incited them to do that. Hamza Zorses responds by stating that the organizer is a South African organization of da'wah that seeks to enrich and empower what he called the Orthodox Islamic tradition. So they invited them as a Sapient Institute to hold that debate and to train local imams of masjids on how to argue for Islam in a modernized manner, the way they have been teaching in England for years now. The first thing to note here, though, is that the organizers actually wanted a debate just for the sake of showcasing Hijab and Zorses' powers as public debaters to the South African Muslim community. So they selected a couple of nobodies, really, two lawyers of very little worth intellectually, probably so that the show might end up being a booming success. The purpose was basically to promote the method itself that Hijab and Hamza promoted and championed, not to defeat any particular opponent. And that, brothers and sisters, demonstrates the fact that debate in that culture is required just for the sake of it being there, of showing that we can participate in it and that we do and that we have a history of that. Which is obviously why Daniel titled that vlog The Necessity of Debate. There has to be debate. Okay? It doesn't matter who it is that we choose to debate with. It doesn't matter why we may think that holding a public debate would be the best way to champion the case of Islam versus atheism or any other opposing ideology or belief system. It doesn't matter who would attend or who would watch, really. It doesn't even matter what the audience would come out believing after the whole thing is over. What matters is for the intellectual community of that country to acknowledge Islam as a player in the field, as a philosophically justifiable belief system that can be argued for in exactly the same manner of debates that the Western culture has come to view as the only proper way for anybody to preach anything at all. Okay? The entertainment value that may be achieved from demonstrating the intellectual breadth of the Muslim debaters and their readings in different areas of Western philosophy, and the way they showcase all of that is in itself what the debate was actually about. In fact, Hijab declares openly that he always needs to achieve that theatrical entertainment value, considering the short attention span of people, especially on social media, and that they are actually competing with filmmakers in grabbing people's attention. Okay? With filmmakers, with Hollywood's movies. I mean, listen to him talk about the issue of charisma and star power in showbiz and stuff. Okay, he's really serious about it. So don't be surprised, brothers and sisters, if in the spirit of the Ikhwani theory of the Islamic substitute, as in substitute for Hollywood entertainment in this case, the next time he holds a public debate, you'd see him dance and jump around with background music and special effects for entertainment all around. Wallahu musta'an. That's what it's all about. Entertaining the audience, really. The academic audience in this case. Okay? Whatever the audience demand, they get. They want a religion that is fully in line with their most cherished paradigms of natural philosophy and metaphysical theory. Fine. That's what you'll get. That's what they'll get. They demand a religion that treats women in the way that their own moral philosophy teaches. Well, that's precisely what we're offering. Okay? They want a religion that calls for universal peace and for encountering debate, dispute, and ultimate freedom of belief, no matter what, where, or when. That's what we have for them. They expect a religion that respects human rights, democracy, and freedom of speech. Well, that's Islam for you. The religion of peace, the religion of freedom. The entire Kalam method was devised historically to appeal to the demands of a bunch of arrogant philosophers who claimed they required a particular kind of evidence to know that they did in fact have a creator, sustainer, who is the ultimate cause for their very existence. Now, I'm not claiming here, brothers and sisters, that these two fellows, Hijab and Hamza, are appeasing the audience to the extent of attempting to show that Islam is indeed compatible with all of these things that I mentioned. No, of course not. I know that they actually took a stance in the lecture against the moral code that their opponents is trying to judge them through. Okay, so I'm just drawing your attention here to the Kalami ethos of entertainment of the audience and appeal to general values and epistemic norms that a target community holds dear, and the different ways in which this ethos manifests in modern practices of da'wah. We see that if we don't see that on your hands, Hamza and hijab, we see it on the hands of others. Okay? So let them know that we, the Muslims, are justified in our faith on the exact same sort of rational and epistemic grounds that they like, the same kind of first principles that underlie pretty much every philosophical paradigm or ideology that they hold dear in their society. So if you do Western philosophy the proper way, the way we, the debaters, demonstrate, you should at least grant us the academic acknowledgement we seek so desperately. Let us do that by showing you that we know more about Western philosophy than those poor fellows that were set up to debate us on atheism on that day. Otherwise, why would it be held of all places in a local university, right? It doesn't get any more academic than that. Selecting the right stage for the right show is everything. Okay? Philosophy, thus, and the profound affiliation with its discipline and academy in the West is the selling point for the deen in these guys' da'wah. It's not about waging intellectual wars, jihad against kufr and atheism using philosophy as they would propagate their agenda to those who would still treat them as Salafi preachers. This can all be done simply by quoting people and refuting them as needed, publicly, where needed. Okay, without having to expose the masses to falsities that you yourself have not prepared to answer, cannot even predict, and cannot even predict would come out in many cases. It's rather about exhibiting scholarly proficiency with Western philosophy and serious association and engagement with its modern academy and its disciplinary discussions, under the belief that alone would be a major gain for the da'wah. Strong point for it. I shall further demonstrate later, inshallah, that that's pretty much all that Hijabs in particular does in his discussions with those he calls to Islam. I know more about Western philosophy and about the ideological schools of thought and the schools of thought of your own religion and the different isms that have emerged in your church than you do. So you should shut up and learn more from me. Okay, if you don't wish to follow me, then just shut up and respect me. Okay, let me teach you to be a better individual, not by teachings of Islam that I am supposedly offering you here. No. But by my own example as a smart, witty, and shrewd debater, my logical prowess, and my academic knowledge in philosophy, and all such aspects of my practice that you would then be welcome to attribute to my religious beliefs somehow. Okay? And that, brothers and sisters, is the mentality of a mutakallim. To them, da'wah is not really about showing the sheer absurdity of false beliefs and thereby making people in obvious necessity to accept the obvious truth. Rather, it's about making the da'iyah look good and worthy of an esteemed seat amongst top-tier thinkers of his time. Once they manage to show that quality in themselves and in the way they argue, then supposedly that would benefit the da'wah automatically, because if someone as smart as that, as well learned as that witty bloke chose to be a Muslim, if someone like him chose to be a Muslim and could really make a fool of his opponent in this way, then it must be a religion that is worthy of consideration after all. A religion through which I would be welcome to continue to practice the same kinds of philosophical deliberation and theorization as I enjoy doing now. Okay? They forget, however, that in terms of intellectual merit, according to the culture they are committed to, the atheist philosopher is and will always be the more highly regarded thinker, because quite simply, they are the ones who are inherently truer to the Greek tradition and its academic heritage and origins. The ones who are braver in opposing inherited myth, more willing to entertain and encourage skepticism and doubt about anything and everything, no matter how scared it might be, and to truly challenge all kinds of dogma and belief that come with the very notion of religious faith, by its very definition. Now that's the kind of quality that makes a philosopher worthy of respect in that culture, such quality that will never elevate any of you guys beyond the level of apology, no matter how well versed you are with philosophy and modern physics. You will always be those guys who are seeking with all their might and power to convince them to convince people that a fundamentally skeptic anti-faith practice of philosophy can and does in fact generate the kind of final faith and commitment that you are asking them to observe. You guys will always be nothing more than those poor, blind followers of an ancient doctrine who are trying with all their power and ability to show that they too are worthy of the same respect that the truly free thinker enjoys in that unholy culture. Those non-Muslims who might be impressed by your intellect and your performance, and who might even consider converting to Islam because of the amusing philosophical show that you pulled and the kalami baggage that you put forth in public debate, could easily get more impressed and blown away by a better, more entertaining show put forth by some atheist or naturalist who is generally held at higher esteem in the same academy. Not to mention that even as they embrace Islam when they choose to do, it's never for the right reason. They would always be open to all kinds of zandaqa that the philosophical method itself would have them entertain about the divine. The method itself, by its very nature, would make it the more rational position to consider in all respects. Okay, if indeed it's a certain metaphysical philosophy that impressed them with Islam in the first place, okay, then no version of Islam that contradicts or challenges that philosophy would be acceptable to them, at all, obviously. Which is why all atheists who convert to Islam due to kalami debates only become Jahmiyyah in divine attributes. That's a fact. And once the philosophy itself is dismissed in the halls of academia or reduced to such just a fringe belief, okay, or fringe theory, or they themselves find reason to reject it, they would lose the very reason why they accepted to embrace Islam at all in the first place, and thereby would revert to atheism once more. And that's another fact. Okay, it happens all the time. As for the original Muslims who may attend the show, there's no telling how many causes of doubt would be presented to them, okay, thrown onto them, and even those of them who may get impressed by your performance, the debater, and would seek to follow your ways in presenting the deen, they would only end up becoming Jahmiyyah themselves too, if not worse. Why? Because the method you employ is founded on building one's core beliefs upon metaphysical premises, and that's the ultimate source of all Jahmiyyah in the history of Islam. Okay, all right. Deducing what meanings are attributable to the maker and what are not from the entailments of such an argument and its metaphysics is how Jahmiyyah came to be at all, as Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah took pains to show in his literature. All that, brothers and sisters, and the mutakallim would still insist that the good is their methods, or that the good in their methods outweighs the bad, and that it is all for the da'wah. Allah musta'an, la rabba siwa. The big illusion that those guys are promoting in all of this, brothers and sisters, and the reason why I bother at all to warn against them, is their persistence, claim, okay, that this is the way of Salafiyya, or Orthodox Islam, as Hamza puts it. Okay, according to what sect exactly is it Orthodox Islam to call unto people to believe in an abstract maker who cannot have any deeds attributed to them at all before the advent of this world, since time itself only started to exist at that point, supposedly, or in a maker who can literally be nothing more than the abstract notion of necessity itself in the mind of Ibn Sina and his followers? Those are the arguments Hijab presented in that debate, and yet he insists that he is only calling people to embrace Orthodox Islam. So what is Orthodox Islam then exactly? What is it? Okay, the Maturidi tradition onto which Daniel has been trained in the Abandi schools, or the cocktail of kalami and philosophical beliefs that Hijab and Hamza are promoting, mixing Salafi Ithbat with Ash'ari Tafweed, along with principles from Ibn Sina that not only imply ultimate ta'til, but the eternality of the world as well, Qidam al-Alam. Okay, what is Orthodox Islam to you guys? What is it? The religion where people grow long beards on their faces, pray 5 times a day in the mosque, and whose women wear burqas? That's it? All sects of Mubtada'ah claim their version of Islam to be the Orthodox version, obviously. So what? We don't get fooled by vacuous slogans or deceived by appearances. Wallahi alhamd, we know better, brother. We know better. Hamza then reveals that they were prepared for a particular setup they had agreed on, and then the setup was changed 15 minutes before the debate started, and that they had thought it would be some sort of a friendly discussion, nothing more. They were surprised to learn that the organizers also agreed to allow 2 other academics to comment on the debate in 10 minutes each after it was over, just to give it more academic worth. Okay? And that's yet another problem with public debates with atheists, brothers and sisters. No matter what you prepare for, there's no telling how things will really unfold once you're there. Okay, you cannot prepare yourself for everything that might happen, no matter how much of your opponent's previous work you manage to read in advance. This makes such a public debate an endeavor where the chances of being able to refute every single falsity your opponent puts forth a 50% chance at best. Okay, it's 50% chance. There would actually be no telling of the real risk factor when it comes to exposing people to unrefuted falsities. Okay, and indeed the opponents did bring up a version of the problem of evil that was largely left unrefuted, that was not properly refuted. So by whose standards should or could such a gamble with people's beliefs be for the good of the da'wah? By whose standards? Only the legendary debater might benefit from such a show, brothers and sisters, and yet another addition to his own resume. Okay? Wallahu musta'an. Despite all the calamities that took place on that debate, Hamza still insists that this is the best way to present Islam. He quotes the Quran, as every mutakallim would, in قوله تعالى ادع لسبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن إن ربك هو أعلم من ضل عن سبيله وهو أعلم بالمهتدين. He comments that Ibn Kathir, Al-Nasafi, and Az-Zamakhshari, who all come from 3 distinct different theological traditions, agree that debating is part of da'wah. And we say, of course it is. Nobody disagrees with that. You will never call unto people to change their faith and their religious commitments without having to argue with them somehow, obviously. Okay? That's not at all what we criticize you guys for. Not at all. The problem is with the method of debating the kuffar for da'wah. The method, Hamza. Okay? Not the notion of the debate itself. The method. Of course there would be debates. There's no avoiding them. But what kinds of debates exactly? A mutakallim would insist that theirs is the best and most fruitful kind, especially when you engage with academics and highly esteemed leaders of thought. And that's where the red herring really lies. They would typically claim that those who criticize them in the Muslim community are unaware of the depth and the subtleties of the opponent's position, and only because they did not study that position the way it needs to be studied would they find their ways of debating them unacceptable. And that's not at all the case. Ad hominem appeals as such will not make you look any better, guys. Okay? We do concede that we need to study their philosophy and before we respond to them. Okay? Their own philosophy. Before we respond to them. We need to do a whole lot of homework for that end, of course. However, how would you define your job in a debate methodologically and epistemologically speaking, and how would you estimate the outcome and the risks involved with public debates in general is where we differ fundamentally. Okay? How you define your jobs in debate and how you estimate the risks and the outcomes of the debate after it's held is where we differ with you fundamentally. You guys believe that the very notion of the world having been created at all, or that it is all in its entirety contingent, is the first claim that demands deductive or inductive proof from your part, as they would claim that it does. And so you would proceed to conduct a propositional syllogistic argument to that effect, trying as best you can to make it acceptable to your opponent, given the currently prevailing metaphysical beliefs about the way that the universe is composed and the reason why things exist the way that they do rather than otherwise. Right? That's what you would do. Now that, Hamza, is the Kalami and the philosophers' way of debate, not the way of the Salaf, and it's fundamentally wrong. It is why Ibn Taymiyyah waged his war against Mutakallimin in most of his literature in the first place. So you cannot embrace that method of debate as such and yet insist that you are Salafi or Athari and that you are following the ways of Ibn Taymiyyah. No, you can't do that. Okay, you're not. Declare it, okay, admit it as clear as day that you fault Ibn Taymiyyah on his broad attack on Kalam and on Ibn Sina's approach, and that you disagree fundamentally with him on his radical criticism of Burhan al-Huduth by al-Ghazali and al-Ahmadi and the likes, and of Ibn Sina's Burhan from contingency, of course, which is the truth of your position here, if you're really honest in the intellectual position you're appealing to. Okay, that's where you stand. Okay, you stand nowhere near what Ibn Taymiyyah was teaching in this respect. Don't quote him thus and pretend that you're with him on his ways and his theology, because you're not. This is intellectual deceit, taghreer bil muslimin. Shame on you both for doing that. Okay, and they do it very often, really. Okay, the problem with these guys, brothers and sisters, is that they want to affiliate themselves with self-proclaimed Salafi preachers in their community, while at the same time achieve academic and intellectual respect in a fundamentally secular academy, the way Christian apologists like William Lane Craig achieved. Okay, that's their target. Okay, thus they had to associate themselves with the single most influential authority in the Salafi tradition with respect to issues of Kalam and philosophy, and to show those ignorants who are impressed by what they do that this is indeed his way. Okay, this is how he would do da'wah, Ibn Taymiyyah, and abide by the rules of debating billatihi ahsan as taught in the Quran. Nothing could be farther from the truth, though, as I've been showing elaborately in my previous responses to Hijab in particular and to Hamza on occasion. Hamza declares in this discussion that the purpose of the debate is actually social engineering. Okay, and by that he means to show that, and I quote, Islam is strong, Islam has intellectual veracity, Islam is not to be messed with. Yes, we're gonna be nice to you, but when it comes to discussion, we're gonna show that it's actually based on falsehood. Okay, even the Quranic rhetoric indicates this. You know, only a fool would reject the way of Ibrahim alayhi salam. End quote. Now, I don't know what exactly he means by social engineering in this context, if I heard him properly. That's an old theory in sociology that has nothing to do with what he's talking about, unless perhaps he's referring to what he later explains as the socio-psychological or social psychological reason why we have to do debates. And we'll come to that, okay? But anyway, that aside, we can't afford to disagree with the goal of showing the strength of Islam and its intellectual veracity, as he puts it. And when he goes on to add that we need to be firm and expose the falsehood of our opponent's position in sharp decisiveness and power, and employ the rhetoric of the Quran, as he says, I can only agree 100%, brothers and sisters. But, and that's a very big but here, how do you guys get around to do that? How do you achieve it? Truth of the matter is, when you argue for the validity of Islam as a belief system from premises that are basically metaphysical claims about the nature of reality and the categories of existence and the likes, that are exactly the same claims, not just the same kind of claims, but sometimes the exact same claims upon which the doctrine of metaphysical naturalism and even the eternality of the world or eternalism were founded in the eyes of many philosophers, even Ibn Sina himself, okay, who proposed some of those premises for his own arguments, then you're not really exhibiting the strength of Islam and its intellectual veracity as you claim, brother. In reality, you're proposing a way to establish the deen upon the exact same foundations that led philosophers of old to deism, naturalistic pantheism, and eternalism. Okay, that's a big deal. It's obviously not the way upon which the rhetoric of the Quran is founded, and if anything, it defeats the Quranic case, Hujjat al-Quran, altogether, leaving it fundamentally contradictory in terms of epistemic grounds and profoundly lacking in terms of prior premises that could justify the Sahaba in accepting it as the truth, or even in using that very same rhetoric in the Quran, the very same rhetoric that the Quran is teaching them, and you're referring to here. Okay? So if that's what you mean by intellectual veracity, then you're doing the exact same opposite of what you claim your goal to be. What you're actually doing, as did the mutakallimin before you, is build Islam upon the Greek foundations of falsehood rather than blasting those foundations themselves as they should be blasted and exposing them for what they really are. Our problem with atheist brothers and sisters is not that they used an immaculately correct method to reach unwarranted conclusions about the unseen and the divine. No, our problem with them is that they employed a fundamentally false method in that respect. Darwinian evolution is not wrong because another theory based on the same method needs to be considered instead, like the ID theory or the likes, for example. No, but because the method itself that any proclaimed scientific theory would employ on that subject matter is at fault methodologically. Modern cosmology is not particularly or partially wrong because some of its models allow for an eternal world, and that in particular is a misuse of the scientific method. No, all scientific cosmology is pseudoscience, okay, in its very principle, because the very idea of building such a model, Big Bang or otherwise, is fundamentally false and presupposes methodological naturalism, which is the offshoot of metaphysical naturalism, which is supposed to be the thing that you're fighting against. Okay? Because it is false and unacceptable to employ the scientific method in this subject matter to begin with. Ibn Sina's categorization of existing things is not wrong because he needed to have articulated his theory in a different manner or for it to achieve its epistemic goals. No, but because the very method that spawns all such metaphysical claims about all of existence and the underlying theory of knowledge it builds upon is sophist, okay, fundamentally false and unwarrantable. And all arguments that build upon that method and that theory will inevitably spawn a maker that is contradictory in the very meaning of his existence and can only exist in the minds of the arguers for it. Okay? The cosmological argument is not wrong because we should use an ontological argument instead, but because any attempt to prove the existence of some maker of all that exists in reality as such through premises that you guys would hope that an academic philosopher would be willing to accept from you is methodologically wrong. Okay? So that's not you demonstrating the intellectual prowess or power of Islam as you claim to be doing, brother. That's you committing a major intellectual crime against Islam, Allah musta'an. A crime that, as history has shown us, results in all kinds of innovation and zandaqa with respect to the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In new Kalami sects, there are essentially Jahmi in their method and practice, despite those sects believing themselves to be the holders of the torch of Sunnah and the true followers of the Salaf in our day and age, the pious Salaf. And just like Ash'ara claimed to be following the creed of Imam Ahmad in Aqidah and to be the true Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, now we're possibly witnessing the birth of a new sect of Kalam among the Hizbis of the West and like-minded people in the Middle East that equally claims to be following the creed of Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. Okay, this is not a matter to be taken lightly, brothers and sisters, so look closely at the beliefs of these guys before you follow them, and don't be fooled by their pretense of Salafiyya and their slogans of following the Athari creed, as people have been fooled before by what we now know as the Ash'ara and the Maturidiyya. Proper da'wah to Islam is not a show of philosophical abilities as per the Western tradition. It's an invitation for people to get out of their ridiculously false beliefs, philosophical or otherwise, and accept the clear truth that the Prophet ﷺ is bringing them. It's not an exercise of metaphysical argumentation in a manner designed specifically to appeal to and appease the major philosophers of our time, so they would count us amongst the ranks, okay, amongst the people who are reasonable people and rational people, intellectual people, stuff like that. No, we're not trying to prove to them that a Muslim can be a good philosopher without contradicting Islam. We're supposed to show them the profound falsehood of the very method they would insist that we use in inviting them to the truth. When someone says, give me an argument or a good argument of type X if you want me to accept claim C to be the truth, and you have an epistemic issue with that demand itself, then you have to show that. You have to show them that X is not the type of arguments that should be employed for this type of claims, and that C in particular is not a theoretical claim that requires deductive or inductive arguments of the type X or of any other type to be known as the truth that it is, and that they need to take off those Greek glasses through which they insist on looking onto the world. Okay. However, since in our case, forging an argument of the required type would readily show them to be in accord with current prevailing theories about the universe at large and with the disciplinary tradition of Western philosophy in thinking and making claims about the world, and that's exactly what they need to apologize for the faith and to avert the accusation of being blind followers, إيمان السفهاء والمقلدين. They happily submitted themselves to that epistemic tradition, that sophist tradition, and sought out different ways to come up with such an argument. Okay, such a required argument. Hamza picked up the modern cosmological argument from Craig's books, whereas Hijab, on the other hand, added to it a modernized version of Ibn Sina's Burhan. And that's it. Their apologies to the academy, their passport to the discipline, okay, their way in, so to speak, their way into the academy. You want to affiliate yourself with a discipline, any discipline, academic discipline, in this case the Western discipline of philosophy of religion, that is, then you have to play by the rules. And that's what Kalam is all about, playing by the rules. What's it always been about? It's not really about converting them to Islam. No, it's about getting them to acknowledge us as worthy fellow philosophers. Only philosophers who believe in a maker. Okay, one way or another. That's all. Now again, I know that at this point many people will be tempted to whine, "Oh, how dare you accuse their intents and hidden motives? Have you seen what's in their hearts?" And I'd say, I don't need to. The method of Kalam, or the ethos or mentality of a mutakallim, as I've called in this analysis, is itself the historical fruit of ill intent. The first Jahmi ever, Al-Jahm ibn Safwan, thought so highly of the philosophers of his time that when perchance he once engaged with some of them and they challenged him to prove or to provide evidence for the existence of his maker, a maker that he doesn't observe with his own senses, and he failed to do so, it's reported that he got so upset that he quit Salat for 40 days. And was it not for the help of his friend Wasil ibn Ata, who eventually provided him with the required argument, he probably would have declared his departure of Islam altogether. كان سيرتد سيخرج من الملة. How can I not provide a philosophical argument for the most سيعلن ردته يعني لأن الذي ترك الصلاة 40 يوم هو أصلا مرتد كده لكن كان سيعلن ردته. Okay. How can I not provide a philosophical argument for the most basic of my religious beliefs? I must really be a blind follower, as they called me. Okay. Am I a blind follower? How can I get out of that? Okay. The man almost lost his mind. So why did he suffer that way? Why did he suffer that way? Because our belief in the existence of our maker is really some sort of philosophical doctrine that needs epistemic warrant, some theoretical argument of the kind they insisted that we should provide, that he should provide, and thus we should be ashamed for not having come up with it at some point in our lives, and should even wonder if we should continue to be Muslims at all, knowing that we don't have it, like he ended up doing, Jahm ibn Safwan. No, absolutely not. Far from it. But because he, given his psychological disposition, that of a maftoon, could not tolerate the idea of appearing to be intellectually lacking in the eyes of the major philosophers of his time. He found himself in the sorry position of having to submit to their demand. Had he been brought up on the true ways of the Salaf, or the Orthodox Islam, to use Hamza's term, he would have challenged their demand and shown them what absurdities it entails to claim that they don't know if they had been created or not, and to insist that only through some sort of analogy, induction or deduction, can it be shown to be the case that they were created. He then would have effectively blown up any reasons they may have offered him to be atheists or agnostics or anything in between or around. But it wasn't meant to be. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had willed differently for a subtle wisdom of his own. Because out of that illness of the heart that man suffered, the way of Kalam was meant to be born in Ahl Qibla, just as it was born before in Ahl Kitab. Okay? Hijab states early in the discussion that in a public debate of the kind he holds, it's a cardinal sin to come across to the onlookers as weak. And that's yet another problem that follows from the Kalami ethos that I've outlined earlier. Okay, because why is this the case? Because the onlooker is supposed to follow the stronger the strong, whoever he happens to be, building his entire belief system on the outcome of a public debate in an issue that both of the opponents are trying all they can to show how deep and intellectually wealthy their respective positions are in such a matter. Because in a context where both your belief system and that of your opponent will, by necessity of context, be presented as two opposing theories about reality that stand on the same epistemic footing, either of you can actually come out as victorious and worthy of embracing their position as final unshakable faith. That's one of the biggest lies that a mutakallim would propagate about what they do in those debates, what they actually do. You cannot aspire to win any such debate, Hijab, in the sense that you would like to fool yourself and your fans into believing. The best you can do is inject some theoretical rhetoric every now and then for the benefit of making you look like you're winning, but in reality you're not. So if by strength you mean showing that you're well versed with philosophy of religion and relevant fields of modern philosophy and ancient philosophy as well, then so would your opponent, obviously. They would try to do just that. And then it would only be a matter of personal taste and heart inclination for any member of the audience to determine which one of you two he or she thinks has done a better job. And if one day you were unlucky enough to engage with someone who turns out to be both better learned on Western philosophy than you are, smarter than you are, more charismatic and eloquent than you are, then he would easily make you look like a fool, just like you seek to do with your opponents on every occasion. Okay, no amount of theatricals would help you then, if or when that happens. The context and the underlying assumption about the nature of the subject matter, as implied by such a theory of knowledge that turned the existence of the Creator into a matter to be settled in that manner in the first place, puts you both on equal footing, okay, intellectually, in terms of the kinds of reasons each of you may have for embracing their beliefs. So what do you even mean by strength and weakness in such a context? Okay, let's assume that you manage to positively ravage your opponent's argument in 10 or 15 minutes, in the 10 or 15 minutes that are given to you to refute him in that debate. Now, let's assume he was even shown to be a total fruitcake, okay? A stupid idiot, okay? That still doesn't change the fact that the best you will have done, really, is defeat just one particular articulation of one particular argument for his theory that he failed to defend, for the theory of this sect of people, okay, and provide an argument of yours, of your own theory, that he failed to refute. That's it. That's all you did. No defeating atheism there. All you will have actually shown is that you are a better debater than he is on that occasion. You might even fail to fare just as good if one day you debated this very same individual in another context on the exact same topic. Okay, you can't guarantee that. So if you claim that by doing what you did in the context of philosophy as an academic discipline, you will have effectively proven or shown atheism to be false, or Islam or even theism to be true, then you would only be fooling yourself and your fans into believing that to be the case. Why? Because both the atheist and the so-called theist sides of that centuries-old debate have already amassed tons upon tons of arguments, responses to those responses, rebuttals of responses to responses, and so on and so forth. The kind of literature that both of you and your followers should know, in advance, that a 1 hour debate wouldn't even begin to scratch the surface of it all. Because the mindset that the discipline itself has created in the West for such a discussion makes it such that nobody's a winner. Nobody will even manage to win anything at all if they insist on holding a debate. And the only gain that can be made is that you will show yourself to be smart enough to defeat that fella. And that's it. Okay? That's it. That's all that you can achieve, really. Alright? There's an informal fallacy in the literature of modern logic that I'm sure you're aware of that goes by the name the fallacist fallacy, or fallacy of the fallacist. Okay, it is when you claim that having rebutted one argument for a certain claim, whatever the subject matter of that claim may be, would effectively bring it down. When you know for a fact that its holders have amassed a multitude of other arguments for their case, and when in fact that you are bound to respect those arguments that they are offering and to render them worthy of consideration, as your method will imply. Okay, so that becomes a fallacy. I vividly remember William Lane Craig pointing out one day in a public debate of his that he doesn't mind if that particular argument of his that he provided on that debate was defeated. Why? He was asked. He said because he had many other arguments, and he laughed and the audience laughed. Okay, I couldn't help but wonder, what's the point of holding that damned debate then? What's the point? Nothing but to show the merits of the debater himself, brothers and sisters. That's the only gain. That's it. A chance for our hero, our legendary debater, to show what he can do in the little time that he has. To show how strong he is in arguing for his position and against his opponent's position on the particular subject matter of the debate. Not how invalid his opponent's entire creed or ideology is, or what other reasons our hero himself may have for embracing his own doctrine. So in reality, nobody has the right to claim that such a debate, no matter how long it may last, should help the audience decide which of the two doctrines is worthy of following, given the damage the discipline they are both affiliating themselves with, the philosophy of religion, has done to the epistemic status of the question itself and to the way of knowing the truth in its answer. I can tell you, brothers and sisters, about two debates that William Lane Craig himself, the role model that these two guys are following, held on almost the exact same question: is God necessary for morality, or something like it, right after one after the other. One of those debates was held against Sam Harris, the renowned neo-atheist author, in 2011. The other was held a few months later in 2012 and presented as a friendly discussion with Shelley Kagan, a highly esteemed professor of moral philosophy at Yale University. Okay. In the first debate, Craig managed to show Harris to be little more than a sophomore student in the analytic tradition and the way that philosophical arguments should be articulated and debunked. Yeah, granted, he really did that. Okay, his fans were of course ecstatic. Okay, and I wouldn't call them students, because as Hijab himself puts it, it's all about the show. Okay, you're a showmaker, you're a star. Okay, and those are your fans. Okay, so his fans were thrilled, and they came out convinced that neo-atheism as a movement has been effectively destroyed, given the status that Harris had already achieved in that movement. However, everybody who watched his other debate with Kagan just a few months later, will have to admit that he was ultimately reduced to a student of moral philosophy that night, and that he had to concede that the rabbit hole goes way too deep for him to be able to argue for what he initially thought he would be arguing for on that discussion. He even had to accept Kagan's objections to certain claims that went unchecked and unchallenged in Harris's debate before, and to admit that there is far more to the issues in question than can be covered in a semester course, much less a one-night discussion, okay, in something as large as an entire course. So if that's the case, then what pride should you take, Craig, in showing your argument from objective moral values and duties to have withstood the attempts by Harris to refute it in the first place? Okay. Your strength as a debater then does nothing to serve your proclaimed cause of convincing people that atheism is false and Christianity is the truth. No, it doesn't. It only helps you personally create a resume where you can say, I defeated X, destroyed Y, made a fool of Z, and barely had a friendly discussion with A, B, and C while I'm doing it. Okay? But if that's all that it really achieves at the end of the day, then perhaps it would be way better and safer for everyone to just invite those people to a street fight or a match of arm wrestling or something like that. Okay, at least people's beliefs would not be damaged with and subjected to unpredictable risk and immeasurable danger, just so that you would be able to thrill yourself and to thrill them and to boost your ego and show off. As you usually do on such a debate. In the cesspool of sophistry that is called the philosophy of religion, none of those shows can amount to anything but some nerve-wracking type of entertainment, as in extreme sports or action movies or the like. Okay, and that's precisely why they are haram in Islam, brothers and sisters. Okay, and that's why the Salaf warned against them. It doesn't matter what happens to your belief system as an onlooker or a member of the audience. All that matters is that I can come across as the stronger debater. Okay, that I can rise above your head. Okay, the one more worthy of academic praise and respect in that setting, more capable of entertaining the audience with reasons to judge him as such, as the more intellectual individual. Okay, no Sunni scholar in the right mind would ever find that to be a good practice of da'wah, one that abides with the teaching of the Quran on using wisdom in arguing with the kuffar. وَلَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. Hamza complains at some point that the opponents didn't play fair when one of them took his time to fire up all kinds of accusations against Islam that would ultimately arouse the rebuke of secularly inclined people in the audience against the deen, because they think they think alike, they think like him. He says it's unfair because he knew that they would not have enough time to refute all that, given the format that they agreed to. And I say, by whose rules was he expecting, was that opponent expected to view that to be unfair? Of course he wouldn't. The rules of someone who is okay with letting every argument he put forth get a chance for getting debunked and ridiculed? No debater would want that. Of course he would do everything in his power to make it such that you don't get a chance to refute him. Of course he would do that. Okay. And there's no rule in that game, written or implied, that keeps any debater from using the format of the debate itself in his favor in such a manner. There's none. I remember, brothers and sisters, a particular instance of a public debate between Ahmad Didat, rahimahullah, and Anis Shorosh, a Palestinian-American evangelist, that was held in the 80s to an audience of 12,000 people, where the latter took the theatrical effect and charismatic performance to its extreme end. Okay, coming out wearing Arabic garments to assert his being more eloquent in Arabic than his Muslim opponent, which sadly he was. Okay, and indeed he went on in 15 minutes and machine gunned almost 150 outrageous claims about linguistic errors in the Quran and moral atrocities in the Sunnah that naturally left Didat flabbergasted. And as to be expected, not only did he come out boasting that he won the debate, which by the standards of the game he did, by the way, he even went on to publish those numerous red herrings and misconceptions that he had only amassed for the purpose of that debate in a book that was arguably the first of its kind in the history of Islam. A book written in a tone that not even the most bigoted Christian Orientalist or evangelist would have dared to write with before in attack of Islam. The man even dared to go one step further and publish a book he claimed to be an answer to the challenge of writing a similar book to the Quran, and he called it Al-Furqan Al-Haq. Okay, and translated even took it onto himself to translate it to English. Okay, he wrote it in Arabic and then he translated it to English, and it was published, and at some point it really did spread around. Okay, before that debate, he was almost literally nobody. Nobody knew who that Shorosh was. So can you blame him for taking such a glorious opportunity to spread his fallacies amongst Muslims in a way that probably would never have been possible if it weren't for that debate and its format? You can't. Okay. I'm not using this example to claim that Didat's debate failed because his arguments were kalami or methodologically wrong. No. I'm only pointing out that in such a culture of Greek philosophical debate where he practiced his da'wah, where a debate would be fixed within a certain limited time frame with only a limited number of refutations and comebacks allowed for each opponent, and where they have to agree that one of them gets the final statement while the other gets the first, the introductory or the opening statement, as though they were equals in the merits that each of their doctrines has, which is the case in such culture. In such a culture, there's no telling what the opponent could do to use that setting and format itself in his own favor. Okay, of course he would use it for his benefit one way or another. Of course, he would be stupid if he didn't. And to this day, many da'iyas find themselves in need to debunk all or at least much of that trash that Shorosh compiled about Islam and its scripture for that fateful debate almost every time they invite a Christian to embrace Islam. And instead of directly attacking the Trinity, which is actually a rational joke if for anybody who happens to think about it. Now our da'iyas, our du'a are occupied with responding to this shit. Okay. That alone amounts to a major victory to the evangelical tradition, if you ask me. A major historical victory. And it was all because of a debate. A public debate. Okay. A debate, by the way, with someone who was widely considered to be the lion of Islam, Asad al-Islam, Ahmad Didat. Okay, you know, he was feared and he was respected. Christians feared the very mention of his name at some point. But after that debate and after that day, all things had changed. Everything changed. Okay, the entire landscape of da'wah and argumentation in inviting Christians to Islam changed because of that. Okay, so how dare you claim that you can really predict or estimate the risk factors involved in holding such public debates in such a cultural context and under such traditional formats and setups that are customary in the West? You cannot. You cannot. And if you guys were honest in claiming that it's all for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not for your own egos, you would have no choice but to admit this. Okay? It's a sheer fallacy to defend kalami debates. And by kalami debates, I mean a public debate that is held with a kafir employing propositional arguments where they should not be employed in what amounts to a sophist methodology. Okay? It's a sheer fallacy to defend kalami debates on the grounds that it has been observed that some people comment that they like them, or that their iman has been solidified because of them, or even that some followers of the opponent have changed their minds and shifted heart and decided to embrace Islam because of them. Kalami debates, in reality, do not call people to Islam to begin with. Aslan. Rather, they call them to a fabricated philosophical position, philosophical doctrine, okay, that is loosely titled theism, where in place of embracing a fundamental naturalistic methodological doctrine about the universe, whilst embracing its entailments to the fullest, which with respect to any claims of the divine, you continue to embrace that very same metaphysical doctrine about the nature of all things that occupy space and exist in time, but with a theological content in addition to it, that basically contradicts the implications of that doctrine. Okay. I've shown and explained at length in previous lectures that the direct implication of modern naturalistic cosmological theory is exactly the same implication of ancient Greek metaphysical philosophy about the cause for all attributes of existing things in space and time to be the way that they are. And that implication is, to put it bluntly, pure atheism. Okay? Nafy sana. There really is no room for a supernatural creator or a supernatural anything at all in existence with such a kind of theory, precisely due to the nature of any metaphysical claim being made about all space and all time, all of space and all of time, as has been the disciplinary method of thinking about the world and reality in the Western Academy since the ancient Greeks. This is why no philosopher can theorize about the world without committing themselves to some implications of methodological naturalism, if not to all of them, and why they never say anything about a transcendental maker they may choose to believe in without committing a profound contradiction by even claiming there to be one at all in reality. So to embrace a metaphysical assertion about the nature of real things that exist outside of our minds, and why and how they exist in space and time, while simultaneously taking that assertion as a premise for the existence of something that does not and cannot itself fall under the explanation proposed by that assertion, is to embrace a fundamentally inconsistent belief system. Okay, fundamentally contradictory. And that, brothers and sisters, is what a kalami debater from any sect of kalam invites people to embrace. Not Islam as we Muslims know it. It's a philosophical position that is thus described. It's also the same doctrine on the divine that a Christian apologist would invite people to embrace, a maker whose attributes are deduced by entailment from the same metaphysical doctrine they all employ in their arguments. The doctrine of the academy, whatever it happens to be like, okay, of the contemporary academy. So theism, brothers and sisters, is not Islam, nor is it Christianity. It's basically the religion of a philosopher who chooses to believe in some abstract notion of a maker, according to the prevailing metaphysical doctrine of his time, while striving to make the scripture he is affiliated with fit it by reinterpretation in every way that they can. Now, I'm not saying that when some atheist chooses to embrace Islam due to a kalami argument, he remains an atheist or fails to become a Muslim. No. Once he spells the Shahada, he does become a Muslim in Islamic law, and if he dies as such, then no doubt it would be better for him than dying as an atheist in the afterlife. لأنه على هذا لن يخلد في النار يعني. However, due to the method of da'wah that was used with him, the doctrine he is actually converted to is not the true religion of Islam he is supposed to embrace and live by. The God who he chooses to believe in is in reality and usually unbeknownst to him not really the same God that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught about, or the God that the Sahaba believed in. And the basic doctrine upon which he founded his entire belief in that God would actually imply the negation of not just his attributes but his entire existence outside of the mind altogether, as we've shown in more places than one. Of course, he would not be aware of that implication, otherwise he wouldn't accept Islam, obviously. But since he only chose to become a Muslim because he liked the idea of a maker whose existence fits properly and sits neatly with the theory that the academy he glorifies embraces, as your arguments suggest to him, he will always be a victim of that theory, of holding it for an article of faith, and at some point realizing that he has to reject much of the scripture of Islam because it would appear to contradict it. Okay? That's where the problem of putting reason before scripture, تقديم العقل على النقل, in all Kalami sects came from. Okay? Because such theory is what they mean by reason, al-aql, following the academy of their time. You have to understand this before you argue for the usefulness and the worth of your method of debate by looking at how many people accepted Islam because of it. No, that's not at all what we should judge it from or according to. Your job as a da'iyah, Hamza and Hijab, is not to get people to spell the Shahada regardless of the way you got them to do that, regardless of how you got them there. Your job is to lead them to it following the ways that the Prophet himself ﷺ taught the Sahaba. Okay, your job is to take them to that end through the right path. Okay, so I don't care how many thousands of people embrace Islam because of your ways. That doesn't justify them in any way, shape or form. The way to call for Islam is itself a part of Islam, part of the religion. الدعوة توقيفية in Islam, and like any other part of the deen, there's no tolerance for innovation here. The Prophet did not teach us to call people to convert to some philosophical doctrine that you call theism and then work our way up to make scripture fit with it. No. He taught us to call unto people to the Quran, to accept the Quran and the Sunnah as he taught them to his students. Okay? Build a man's entire belief system. To build a man's entire belief system, however, upon a theory, and you're welcome to watch it crumble eventually with the fall of that very same theory, of that theory itself. Okay? Obviously, no theory should ever be treated as an article of faith, no matter how confident you are in its validity at any given time, and no apology you guys put out or put forth in any debate can possibly justify you in doing that. Okay? A theory will always remain just that, a theory. An assumption that might be wrong just as well as it might be right. And just as it happens to be a mainstream today, there will come a point in the future when the academy will likely replace it with another theory altogether. It will be superseded. This is why before the efforts of the likes of Craig, Ash'ari Mutakallimin found that unless they try to make their beliefs relevant, to make their methods relevant to today's prevailing metaphysics somehow, they would only be the laughing stock of the current academy. People who still insist on founding their beliefs entirely upon an antiquated metaphysical doctrine from the 3rd century BC that students of philosophy only encounter today in books of ancient history. How pathetic! Are you serious? Are you guys really building your entire belief system on that? What's that? Okay. So if you understand this, brothers and sisters, you will immediately see why William Lane Craig became an instant hero and a savior, not just for Christian apologists, but for mutakallimin of Ahl al-Qibla as well, because he managed to master an understanding of modern-day physics and cosmology while simultaneously observing the Kalam tradition and its overarching goals in establishing theism and theistic beliefs in a way that enabled him to revive that tradition after centuries of stagnation and disengagement with the intellectual elites. Okay, thanks to him, a mutakallim can finally show himself to be relevant to current academia once more, like they strove to do in ancient times. Okay, a satellite doctrine, as I call it, that revolves around the praised science of our time can finally be forged. A modern theism, like the mutakallimin of old, forged their own theism around the sciences of their time, of the ancient Greek academy. So of course, they would praise him as their savior and their hero, of course. And someone like Hijab would ultimately try to follow his example and aspire to be the Craig of Ahl al-Qibla, not just by being at the forefront and center stage of today's Kalami debates in the West, but also by engaging with the mainstream academy of philosophy in a similar manner to what Craig did. Craig revived the cosmological argument in his PhD thesis, forging a version of his own, using it in every public debate. And guess what? Hijab too is doing the same thing with his own PhD thesis, but with Ibn Sina's Burhan instead. Okay, in the process, he tried to show that by doing so, he circumvented the criticism that Ibn Taymiyyah directed to the cosmological argument in its very principle, since his own version, as he forged it, does not rely on some theory about the world, as in cosmological argumentation in general, one that might fail the test of time eventually, but instead relies on first principles, as he calls them. And I've shown, however, that this is not and cannot be the case with any such metaphysical argument, and that while he may have avoided Ibn Taymiyyah's critique of the cosmological argument, which he actually hasn't, since his method is to use this in some occasion and to use that in another, as he wrote in his book The Burhan, he fell headfirst under his knife with Ibn Sina's argument, under Ibn Taymiyyah's knife. Okay? Hamza admits that what he has when he says many people embraced Islam because of his debates can only amount to anecdotal evidence, which is good of him to do, of course. Jazakallah khairan, ya akhi. However, he needs to sit back and look at the full picture the way it needs to be seen, to understand the two main fundamental issues that we're raising here against his method and Hijabs. The fact that what you're actually calling them to embrace is not really the religion that we Muslims inherited from the Prophet ﷺ, and the fact that you cannot predict at all how many people would go astray due to exposure to whatever falsities and misconceptions your opponent happens to puke out during the debate. Alright? However, he proceeds to argue for his practice from a social psychological perspective, as he calls it. He says, and I quote, "The development of the social norm, according to social psychologists, is based on the need to feel certain and the need to belong. Many, it's unclear part here, many want to have certainty. This is called informational social influence. If they can't find that certainty from their subgroup, they're going to go to the dominant in the ideological frame to gain that certainty. That's why they become liberal. Okay, that's why people become secular. Okay, and because of some intellectual idea, this is all nonsense. Not because of some intellectual idea, he says, this is all nonsense. It's because their subgroup, in other words, the Muslim community, is not giving them that certainty. Also, the sense of belonging. They may not gain it sometimes, so they go to the dominant frame, the dominant ideology. So from a social psychological perspective, debates that we do will literally fast track that certainty to certain individuals by showing that we have a platform, we are intellectual, we have the truth, we have intellectual veracity, we have eloquence, we have strength, and it also shows that your subgroup, you have more of a sense of belonging to them because they're actually winning. What he actually means to say is that you want to belong to the winners. This is a deep social psychological phenomenon, he says. You cannot say debates are pointless. Debates are necessary in order to achieve that sense of certainty, psychological certainty, social certainty, and that sense of belonging. Because if you don't give them that, they're going to go to the dominant frame. And you could check this out. This is basic social psychology. Normative social influence, informational social influence, and debates are a mechanism to increase that certainty amongst the subgroup when we're infected by this dominant liberal and secular ideological frame. That's so important to understand. Look, I'll give you another example, he says. There's one person that said to me, he started practicing yani salli yani. Okay? Because one of these debates, they didn't understand anything they said, right? He said, I didn't understand it. It's too complicated. But you know what? The very fact that you're there on a level playing field, and you're showing that we have intellectual strength was enough for me. End quote. Now, I'm sorry to say this, brother Hamza, but none of this justifies the public debates that you guys hold the way that you do them. Nothing justifies this, all this theorization that you put forth doesn't help you at all. In fact, if anything, it only strengthens our objection to your ways. Because while it is indeed part of the job of the da'iyah to seek to solidify certainty against all social pressures and stimuli that might diminish it, and of course that's true, and to emphasize the sense of belonging and identity in any Muslim community in the West in the face of liberalization and secularization efforts and all efforts to blur the distinctions between the true Muslim identity and the secularized Western identity. While we admit that's of course part of the job of a Western da'iyah, the Kalami method of debate is unfortunately designed in a way that does the exact opposite to that. The exact opposite. Okay? Forget about that anecdotal case of someone who has no idea what you guys are talking about and who finds it all way over his head, too deep and complicated for him to make heads or tails of it. And in reality, your audience, Hamza, is indeed those who do comprehend and understand what you and your opponents are interchanging, what you're putting out there. Okay, that's the largest bulk of your audience, both on your side and on the opponent's side. You're even trying to focus on that particular audience as evidenced by the fact that of all places you chose to hold that debate in the university. Okay, so anecdotes aside, your audience is already inflicted from both sides with a deep-seated sense of commitment to and association with the inherited social and cultural norms that defined the debate in its very concept, such norms that turn that question you're mostly debating about, the existence of God, into a deeply complicated philosophical issue that takes so much learning to even begin to qualify to discuss it in the first place. Okay, the question of whether or not we have been created at all. That's the cultural background they all agree to in advance, they all ascribe to. The same background that you, the debater, has chosen to respect and uphold by the very nature of the argument you're employing in such a debate, and by submitting yourself to the structure and the format that it has to take. That, Brother Hamza, is a cardinal defeat that you suffer before you even sit down and say anything at all. By submitting to an epistemology that renders such a question a difficult theoretical issue that requires quite a lot of work to even begin to have some reasonable answer to it, you have already exhibited defeat implicitly, and even belonging to the same discipline that grants such sophistry the same intellectual worth as your entire religion, if not more. Now, the discipline you are supposed to protect the community from succumbing to, the same discipline you're supposed to protect the community from succumbing to. Now, I would have considered agreeing with you that addressing that social psychological issue is what you do with your debates if instead of presenting propositional arguments for the existence of the Creator, okay, you attempted to bring down the entire Greek tradition of doing metaphysical theory of the sort that leads people to think that there is no room left for the supernatural, or if you at least attempted to refute the atheistic and secular position and to show how ridiculous it is without seeking to propose some metaphysical grounds or argumentation for your own belief, building on some philosophical notion that you hope your opponent would have to concede to. Sadly, however, that's not what you did. That's not what you do. You have chosen to submit yourself to the epistemic condition of building your own faith upon philosophical premises of the sort that you hope your opponent might accept. The culture that upholds such kind of debate and propagates it, regardless of the issue of secularism and whether or not seculars actually encourage such debates, which they do, by the way, of course, is a culture that has already chosen to believe collectively that the issue itself is the single most difficult, demanding philosophical issue there can be, proving the existence of God. Okay, what an undertaking! Proving the existence of God. Oh my God! And instead of trying to save Western Muslims from succumbing to that cultural norm, that zeitgeist of the West, and to the Greek tradition and sophistry that it comes from, you chose to take that tradition itself as grounds for the certainty you claim that you're offering your audience. That's building the certainty that Islamic faith requires on the only source of skepticism and existential doubt that humanity has ever known, the Greek tradition of metaphysical theory. Okay. What certainty are you even talking about then, brother, in a context of propositional deliberation where you are required to admit that your argument can be blown away in principle just as easily as your opponent's argument can, and there is literature on either sides of the debate to do just that? Okay. You are required by the tradition you have chosen to observe before you even start to debate to declare that your beliefs are only the best that you, the debater, could achieve at the time, following the evidence that you have acquired thus far, and that you are and always will be ready and willing to drop your entire belief system in favor of the opponent's position if one day a good debater managed to convince you that all the arguments you've ever proposed in any debate are flawed. If that's the reason that you have for accepting Islam, then you should have similar reasons to reject it, obviously. You are required to admit, you should permit similar reasons to reject it, okay? You are required to admit, just like Craig had done, just like Craig had to, in more than one occasion really, that the disciplinary discussion in literature is way too deep to be settled in any debate, and that the literature is way too big to be covered by a student of philosophy in 1, 2, or even 3 lifetimes. That's what a good disciplinary practice of academic philosophy implies, guys. That's what you have to exhibit to the academy, okay? So how on earth is this practice of kalami argumentation supposed to fast-track certainty into your audience the way you claim it to do? It doesn't, and it couldn't, given the Greek epistemology it presupposes, given what doing philosophy academically on this subject matter is required to be like. Okay? And besides, what in the world is a guy who doesn't understand the word from what you guys are exchanging together? What is he doing there anyway in the first place? What is he doing there, attending such a debate? You should advise him never to do that again, even as someone who believes in the legitimacy and benefit of kalami debates. But that's how little these guys know about the reason why the Salaf condemned the practice of kalam in its very principle. And here they are trying to justify it using social psychology. Wala hawla wala quwwata illa billah. Besides, even if we were to present our case the proper way, public debates would still not be the way to go, for the other reason that I explained earlier. I mean, why not provide lectures where you quote those philosophers and authors you chose to debate, and publish those on the same media outlet that you address the Muslim community through in other forms of da'wah? Okay, why give them a chance to even think and come up with better, more improved ways to attack Islam and to attack us in such a context? Why? If you think they have in fact said something worthy of response and worthy of warning people against, then do that in a lecture, do that in written literature, do that in a public refutation without these guys being present. You don't have to have them present to defend themselves. But the format of the Greek Academy makes it a must, a necessity, that you have to bring them forth so that people would listen to both of you equally, would give you both an equal chance to present your case, and then they would decide which one of you is saying the truth. We don't succumb. We don't agree to that code. We don't have to agree to that code. We don't have to agree to that rationality, to that format, to that form of engaging with people who oppose us. We don't have to do that. Okay? And it's definitely not the best way to do it in our perspective as Muslims. That's not the setting of someone or the setup of someone trying to teach people the truth or trying to warn them against falsity. No, that's the setup of a court, a trial at a court of some sort. Okay, someone is bringing both of you forth, sitting you on equal footing, on equal grounds, giving both of you an exactly equal chance of talking in exactly the same amount of time. If everyone is allowed to present his case and to defend himself, and then the judge would make the judgment. Okay, that's not what we do in da'wah. That's not what we do. It's not. We don't offer an atheist a chance to defend himself, or to defend his atheism, or to defend his especially someone who has a long history of attacking Islam and slandering Muslims the way that those guys usually do. What are we doing giving them a chance to defend themselves? To defend themselves against what? Okay, our job is actually to refute them. Our job is actually to show how ridiculous their position is, so that people would be saved from falling victim to all of that. Okay, to whatever they have, from falling victim to whatever they have to put forward for themselves. We're not setting up a court for people to judge which one of us is worthy of being accepted. That's not what we're doing. They're not equals to us, guys. We don't see them as equals. We don't see them as undead, lana. Okay, who have an equal footing, an equal chance of being epistemically worthy of following. I'm not arguing them such that at the end of the debate I might in fact change my mind and become an atheist. I'm not doing that, and I shouldn't even allow the setting itself to look like it's a way for that to happen, or for someone to think in that manner. I shouldn't. Okay, but that's exactly what the Greek tradition forces you guys to do. Okay, it places both belief systems on equal footing, whether you like it or not. We don't accept that. Why should we accept that? Why should we accept that? What forces us to accept it? Okay, what forces us to? Nothing. All right. It doesn't have to be a debate. It doesn't have to be a debate. It can be presented, whatever case you have to make against atheism and in favor of your deen can be presented through other public outlets, through other forms of media. It can be presented in the form of a public lecture, for example. Why not? Why not a public lecture? Okay. That would obviously deliver the content that needs to be delivered without having to suffer the unpredictable risks. Right? So why make it a public debate? Because people need to see the opponent humiliated? Well, you can still do that in a lecture, no problem, and we do it all the time. The reason, brothers and sisters, is because a public debate can easily be turned, when needed, into a wrestling match, where the audience will get pumped up and excited due to the entertainment factor that Hijab pointed out, and you can be far more theatrical and entertaining in a debate, inviting people to take sides with you, just as would be the case in a game of football. Okay, when the engagement with the opponent is taking place in real time in a debate, rather than when you're only responding to him while he's not there physically. Okay, and that's what most debaters seek to invest in for their own ego and their own personal gain, mostly the hype that comes with the direct confrontation. But that, brothers and sisters, is precisely what makes it an extremely dangerous and risky undertaking. Even when you follow the way of the Salaf in arguing for your case, not the way of the Kalam. Because when people are so excited and hyped up in defending their faith, they would be willing to accept anything you have to offer in response to your opponent's attacks. You will be their champion, okay? Their winning horse. No matter how insufficiently considered or understudied it may happen to be on your part, you are under constant social pressure throughout the duration of the debate to fire out the swiftest and most appealing responses in as little as a few minutes sometimes, right after you hear the opponent's attack, whatever it may happen to be like, so as not to let your fans down. Okay, the fans are expecting more of you all the time. Better and better. Punches, heavier punches, every single word must be a heavy punch. The people who have come to cheer you should not be disappointed. Okay, the showmanship factor and the hype it comes with will almost definitely put you in many situations, where you know that had you had more time, you would have responded differently. Okay, that alone is a risk no wise da'iyah should be willing to take, brothers and sisters, unless it was absolutely necessary that they do, unless there was absolutely no way to face the necessity of pushing away the batil, the falsity. It's not a game of football where in theory you can be prepared for every attack and every counterattack, and you can trust your skills to serve you as needed when needed. Okay, no. Even in such a match, you sometimes fail for reasons you did not foresee. And the fact that the audience desires the inevitable exchange to turn into such a game is more the reason not to do so, not to comply. However, the Kalam tradition teaches its practitioners to accommodate their audience, to accommodate them, to entertain them, okay, give them what they need. يعني ما يطلبه المستمعون. That, as Hijab explained, is an essential part of how a debate should work. This also results in debates where Kalam arguments are presented in your fans swallowing those arguments, okay, and treating them as the only line of defense we Muslims have against atheism. Indeed, Hijab does promote his Burhan in his book, The Burhan, as the single unobjectionable theological argument ever formulated. No such thing, as I explained elsewhere, there's no such thing as an unobjectionable theological argument in the context of philosophy. But that's not only what he claims. It's what his fans and followers would be conditioned to believe due to his practice. Okay? In the context of a heated debate, his fans might actually become more confident in the validity of such an argument than in the truthfulness of anything you tell them that the Quran actually teaches. That's a huge problem. I mean, after all, it becomes to them the strongest suit of arms in their war with atheism. It becomes the first reason why they themselves accept the Quran itself as true revelation. This automatically creates zealots out of them, whether they feel it or not. Try to talk an addicted follower of debates out of kalam and the method of kalam, or out of particular arguments that he has embraced as the basis for their reasonability and rationality of their entire belief system, and you would see what I mean. Wallahu musta'an, wa la rabba siwa, wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah.